one day we're going to build technology that's going to bridge those gaps and do those calculations. That's exactly what you're doing now, which is awesome. I mean, you have to think like that as a brand, to think differently in each channel.
This is the Ecommerce Braintrust, a podcast about building momentum online for established consumer brands. Join our hosts and their expert guests for high-level conversations about e-commerce strategies, trends, and innovations. Access our Braintrust and boost your brand's e-commerce potential.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ecommerce Braintrust podcast. I am your host, Kiri Masters, and I'm joined by your co-host, Julie Spear.
Hi, Kiri.
So if you're tuning into this podcast for the first time, on the Ecommerce Braintrust podcast, we talk about issues and opportunities related to brands selling on Amazon. And we come at that topic with a background in this category at Bobsled Marketing, the agency where we help brands to grow and protect their sales on Amazon. And through Bobsled Marketing, we have met Alistair McLean, the guest on our podcast interview today. And Alistair founded a software company called Ecommerce, which we're familiar with. It's a suite of tools for Amazon sellers selling on the Seller Central program. And I wanted to get Alistair on the show today because a lot of those tools have to do with improving profitability for Amazon sellers. A lot of the times when we're talking about Amazon, the topics veer into sales and volume and revenue. And for us, we're interested in talking about protecting brands, sales and revenue as well. But we don't talk all that often about profits and fees and margins and stuff like that. So I wanted to get Alistair on because that is sort of a core part of the software that Ecommerce looks at.
Yeah, it's nice. He gives some interesting perspectives on how to kind of measure your profitability and kind of the key factors to look at when considering profitability issues. It's a great lens to be looking at no matter what your role in the company is. And I think we started out talking about things from sort of an entrepreneurial standpoint, but then for everyone who's listening that is involved with working with a larger brand where you may not have full control over your supply chain, full control over operational decisions which impact profits, there's still a lot of things that you can be doing with advertising, with inventory management, even the way that Amazon categorizes the size and weight of your items, whether, checking whether they actually have those metrics correct. So not to give too much away, I don't want to give too much away before we get into it, but before we do, Julie, is there anything that you want to prime our listeners to listen out for during this interview? I think you have an interesting conversation with him about the balance between focus and diversity in catalog. I think that's an interesting area to zero in on, especially given our previous conversations about establishing your brand presence on Amazon, the steps to take to do that and what that can look like. So I feel like conversation you have kind of ties nicely to those previous conversations as well.
That's a great point. Yeah. How to make more money, make more profit off the existing products that you have, sell more of them. There's lots of ways to increase the profitability and sales of your assortment, but where do you want to be focusing in on? Great point. Well, let's get into the interview. And then after I finish talking with Alistair, Julie and I are going to come back and wrap up the episode. So thanks for joining us on the Ecommerce Braintrust podcast, Alistair. Before we get into talking about how to help a FBA seller's margins, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background as it pertains to Ecommerce, where you started, how you got involved with Amazon, and then what you do at your company.
Thank you so much for having me, Kiri. I'm really excited and I really appreciate you having me on the show. And it's a great question. I've actually been involved with e-commerce for about 15 to 16 years now. I actually started off, came to the US, started selling products from my dorm room whilst at college at Harvard, and really literally was just shipping goods from my dorm. Got an invite to be one of the first third-party retailers on Amazon in 2003, and really was a seller between 2003 and 2010, but started to build technology, started to build a sort of playbook, if you like, as Amazon continued to change. So when I sold my actual e-commerce business myself, I wanted to help other sellers with special technology. And that's how Takeometrics was born. So we were the first company in the US to do repricing. Then we were the first company to release a platform to help sellers optimize for profitability through FBA. And last year, we were the first company to do a machine learning platform for sponsored products. And then we've got some really cool things that we're going to be releasing later this year. So I've really enjoyed being at the forefront from a seller's perspective. And now we're helping thousands of sellers, be more profitable with software.
Right. It's a great place to come from, because with brands that have large catalogs, or even brands that really want to streamline their Amazon operation, it's really important to have, there's so much data within Seller Central. It's very overwhelming to know what you're looking at and what is actually an important metric. And so to have software that enables you to sort of separate the wheat from the chaff and figure out, well, what are we actually working with here? What are all the impacts on our profit margins, and how can we improve those? So that's exactly why I wanted to get you on the show today, because you have such a wealth of knowledge there, both as a previous seller and then getting really deep into the development of software that actually tracks it and gives recommendations to brands on how to improve profitability.
Thanks. Yeah. And just on that note, Kiri, I don't think it's necessarily an Amazon specific thing. In retail, it's a real challenge. Profitability relative to sales are two very, very different things. So it's very, very easy to get sucked into this mindset of quoting your top line revenue number, whether you're in brick and mortar, if you're, a .com website, and of course with Amazon, which is even harder because of all the different marginal costs. And I lived that journey. When I graduated college, I slept in my office for 2 years because I had accumulated so much inventory that I thought I was generating a lot of profit because my top line was growing, but I had all of that capital tied up. And I think that's the real challenge with retail. It's so exciting, especially if you're an Amazon seller, to see growth, to be able to tell your friends and family, I'm selling $1 million a year. And it's that nuance of saying, I'm making $1 million a year or selling $1 million a year are two very, very different things. It's just very, very important that, and that's why we wanted to help and build technology that was very sort of disciplined.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, let's get into sort of the top causes of profitability issues for an FBA, for a brand selling using FBA. And I know that there's a lot of operational aspects of it as well as promotional. And we're specifically going to talk about advertising too. So what do you find as being the main drivers of poor profitability for an Amazon account?
It's certainly around inventory. If you think about the risk as an entrepreneur, if you're, trading the stock market that is Amazon, you are investing and turning that capital into inventory. So the biggest wastage that we see, or the biggest factor that contributes to profitability, is the challenge that every seller is trying to optimize for, which is, trying to match demand. If you don't have enough inventory, of course, you're never going to sell anything. And if you have too much, you're going to have stale, obsolete inventory that you're going to pay those storage fees for, you're going to have to liquidate. So it's that challenge that a lot of the profitability from a seller's business goes actually into inventory. For brands, I think we've seen less of that as a problem because many of the brands on Amazon are just starting out and they're thinking more about growth. But when you start to scale, you can really see that in the data. So we work with thousands of sellers. We're literally optimizing billions of dollars worth of data and inventory. And you can see when it starts to get to a certain number of SKUs, the problem becomes really, really tricky. It relates to the focus of a seller being able to reorder. If you've got, let's say, 4 or 5 SKUs, the reorder problem, it's something that you can really focus on. But when you get to maybe 10 to 15 SKUs or even 50 to 100 SKUs, things become much, much harder. And then there's those Pareto principles around the 80-20 rule that are sort of counterintuitive because a lot of sellers think about trying to grow the business by getting more SKUs, when in fact, the focus on the existing SKUs is often where the profit lies. So it's that kind of mirage, if you like, of sellers wanting to add more SKUs that I think creates this compounding inventory problem.
Or even when they're trying to launch in new markets, which Amazon really promotes international markets a lot as a way to grow your sales. But if you've got poor margins in the US or whichever marketplace you started with, and you're launching in new markets, then you've actually got a whole new layer of costs to add in there, and it could make it even worse. So
Exactly. I totally agree. It's that sort of balance between focus and then diversity. And I think it's sort of counterintuitive, as I've mentioned earlier. It's the idea that as an entrepreneur, you're paranoid about having, all your eggs in one basket, or, what happens if a competitor jumps on this product and overnight, wipes me out? I need to have more SKUs, or let's try and sell in the UK, or let's try and sell in Canada, as you're mentioning in the international piece. But if you look at the statistical performance of sellers that have been really, really confident in one particular product, or being just the best and being focused, that's where, on average, they're more profitable. It's that sort of confidence. Of course, it varies. It depends on how much intellectual property you have, how much sort of defensibility you have around your idea. But I think it's the recommendation that I would have to help your listeners and those starting out, or even seeing early success, is to sort of think about doubling down. How do you make the existing flywheel just get better and better? How do you leverage new advertising? How do you get more reviews? How do you get sticky within Amazon? It makes sense because it's so competitive. So as soon as you start to think about diversification, you're losing that edge. Yeah, I mean, that's the recommendation I have. And once you start to do that, you can drive what's really important around economies of scale. So the strength of retail is volume, of course. Once you get volume, you can have more leverage against your suppliers, and you might be able to squeeze even more margin out of the same products. That's another thing that I think on the smaller scale, some entrepreneurs miss. The idea that the efficiency gains and the additional negotiation leverage you can get out of doing the same thing over and over again and buying at more scale, consolidating shipments, consolidating packing, putting more pressure on your manufacturers is so powerful. And it's a basic economic principle, but something that I think more entrepreneurs, especially on Amazon, should focus on.
Right. Let's talk about it from the perspective of a larger brand as well, because I think that all the points that you're making about the supply chain are really important. But for a brand that's larger and there's more people involved with making the sausage, so the person that's involved with administering the Amazon account, the Amazon channel, the brand manager, the marketing manager, there's limits to how they can affect COGS.
Right.
So what would you say to a person who has a fixed COGS and all that they have to play with is the fees that are generated on Amazon with fulfillment, storage, shipping, inbound costs, things like that? I know that these are all things that you can track within Takeometrics.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, your point about tracking and metrics themselves, I mean, that's the first part. I mean, one of the things that I often do when I'm getting on a call, with a brand, or, we're sitting down trying to help someone, is to ask the simple question of, firstly, how much inventory do you have at risk? And I'm really, really shocked at often the answer is, we don't actually know, or we have to pull these reports. Putting into place a disciplined approach, firstly, to be able to measure, that's essentially the ethos of our company. You can't manage what you can't measure. So first order of solving the problem is to firstly have the controls in place. Often, Seller Central is not sufficient to do that. So, that's where, we encourage sellers to, use tools like ours to be able to understand their total inventory. Their return rates is another really, really important leakage point that's quite hard to find in Amazon. The cost of unsold inventory, how much money is tied up in goods that aren't moving, which of course relates to the long-term storage fees and just monthly storage fees. And then also sort of the margins themselves. basically auditing the data. One of the things that we've seen frequently is the fact that the fee changes for FBA are variable based on the size of the packaging, obviously, but sellers not auditing what Amazon's charging is often, an opportunity. For example, you could be overcharged for certain goods. So there are all these different leakage points. But before you start to think about them and panic, just laying it all out and getting a really strong picture. Obviously Microsoft Excel is, having someone in your company that has those strong skills, that it's almost like an accounting background. Get someone in the company or someone in the management team looking at all of these different fees, or a system like ours to do that. And once you've done that, then you can work out where are the leakage points, set a project up to audit these different areas, and then you've got to plug those leaks.
Right. That's a huge one. And I love how you pulled out the example of the shipping fees, because there is a big difference between what Amazon considers oversized and a standard package. And We've even seen instances where there'll be a product that has just like a color variation or some cosmetic variation, and Amazon has a different fee structure for fulfilling that SKU versus a SKU that is exactly the same dimensions and weight. And there's just something that's gone awry at the fulfillment center where someone's weighed something incorrectly. And it's a very simple fix to actually go back to Amazon and say, hey, can you please reweigh this? We don't think that this is the correct data. And you could probably save a lot of money if that's a fast moving item. Yeah.
Well, it's just
compounding.
Exactly, compounding. You've got it. And again, I think that's why Excel, coming back to that, is just a really, really, it's a boring place for many people. A lot of really creative marketing people or product people don't want to be sitting there looking at Excel models. And really, it's the devil in the detail, right? That ultimately is a retail business. It's those different marginal fees. I think the other one that you mentioned earlier is increasingly important is the advertising cost. We're doing a lot with Amazon. We built a platform that actually optimizes, really the only platform out there that's optimizing based off profitability, looking at your overall, what we call the flywheel algorithm, the idea that you've got an attribution. When I say attribution, I mean a relationship between the advertising spend and your organic sales. A lot of sellers really, really struggle with that relationship. They're not sure how much they should be paying for advertising in order to support their growth of their organic sales. And mathematically, we've built a lot of machine learning and econometrics modeling in the background that's helping sellers do that. It's just really important because if you're a brand and Amazon's ecosystem is changing around advertising, you've got to know what you're investing in. It's just a hard calculation. We have people switching on advertising, switching it off, saying things like they think that they could be selling the equal amount if they didn't advertise. It's just a much more complex problem. So all the things that we've already talked about, which is the packaging, the FBA, and now you layer on advertising, it's just a really, really tough sort of math problem, and something that we're really passionate about helping sellers with.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point to get into about how software actually helps with this stuff. So you have two primary software platforms. There's Ecommerce and then Sponsored Product Optimizer, which you were just mentioning before. How does this help to streamline the workflow of reviewing profitability, optimizing it? Walk us through that.
Yeah, sure. So the original sort of platform has been focused on helping sellers with FBA, and we have a tool there called FBA Insight that's helping a lot of sellers reorder the right goods, get them into FBA, keep track of their profitability, and really manage the risk, understand their P&L. And that's really exciting. We've helped hundreds of sellers, really save huge amounts of money on Amazon and just really solve that sort of black box problem. I mean, they really are flying blind with Seller Central. You can probably tell from some of the things that I've said earlier, I'm always sort of looking for the next thing. I mean, that's our mission as a company. So what we're really excited about is this new vision of more of a data driven platform that can actually help sellers make better decisions. And that's the big step forward we took with Sponsor Products Optimizer. The idea that the software is actually going to do the calculations for you. It's actually going to make changes with the bids, and it's actually going to make the recommendations. So there's a huge difference in the workflow. My vision is that we can build software that our sellers can use, and they can really trust an automated platform, similar to, Tesla as a company has a self-driving car and an autopilot today. Over time, that will become autonomous. We have R&D and research around the same type of thing. So, Kiri, you'll be able to wake up in the morning as a seller, have on your phone a recommendation that says, look, we see this as unprofitable. This particular ad's unprofitable. Click here. Would you like to make an adjustment? Or we've made a recommendation to reorder this type of product. Would you like us to go ahead? Or even we see this is now selling on Shopify better than it was on Amazon. Would you like us to shift over there? And that's the vision that we're working on. And that's a big difference. There's no one in the market really doing that. And we've hired some amazing people, sort of world-class econometrics professors that have come to our company and are working on that data science problem.
Wow.
So the first part of it is sponsor products. And, you can tell I'm really passionate about this.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to also ask you about some other views of looking at profitability from a channel standpoint. And so a lot of our clients at Bobsled Marketing and people who listen to the show have a multi-channel business, either selling to brick and mortar retail, through e-commerce, and on marketplaces, including Amazon. And I think the ones who are really looking at things strategically look at the overall costs of acquiring customers in each channel, as well as order and per SKU basis. And what I mean by that is, what's your customer lifetime value and what's your customer acquisition cost per channel? Mm-hmm. And so Amazon doesn't give you that data just by poking around in Seller Central. You can certainly going back to your comment about not every brand manager and marketing manager wants to stare at pivot tables all day, but that's something that we do for our clients. Yeah. Actually, we pull together really detailed CLTV and customer acquisition reporting, because it's not going to be very valuable, to be honest, if you're not tracking it in other channels. But that
totally agreed.
Yeah, I mean, Amazon can be viewed as an acquisition channel as well, and a place where people are reordering your products as well, especially because they make subscribe and save so simple. But yeah, just curious of your thoughts of that. Like, what are the different ways we should be looking at profitability? There's SKU level, and there's also channel level and customer level. What do you think is important?
Totally understand. Yeah, I mean, I like where you're going in the terms of thinking of lifetime value. That's the right mindset for a really sustainable brand. I think it's even more so when you look at how Amazon's changing. Let's just take Amazon for a moment. I mean, the idea of headline search advertising now, the new ads that are coming, we get a lot of visibility of what Amazon's working on, the Amazon Shops initiative. These are all things that relate more to a brand building brand equity, building this sort of non-linear customer acquisition cost, the idea that brand can start to establish market share within Amazon. And of course, if you're talking multi-channel, and I know you guys do an amazing job for your brands and your sellers outside of Amazon as well, and help them look at the big picture, that's just really important. And it's, of course, very different on these emerging channels like Instagram, Facebook, and others. So I love where you're helping your sellers and your brands with this sort of lifetime value calculation. There is that sort of almost myopic view that you're looking at just raw profitability. But if you want to build a really sustainable brand, in a way that becomes a barrier to entry. The idea the brand has to get established, and you have to think about a different life cycle for your sellers. You can kind of see this in other tools in the market, and how Amazon's structured. For example, with email marketing, you can see how successful email marketing still is for .com brands. But that concept is not really established, of course, on Amazon because of the fact that you can't remarket to your consumers.
Right.
You're absolutely right in the sense that you've got to think differently and play the channels in a different way. Of course, if you're looking at Facebook and Instagram and you've got email marketing in play, and those are tremendously successful. You look at a company like MailChimp, which is, one of the leading providers of email software. Think how successful that company is because email still works. And, those are things that, we're very focused on Amazon. We consider ourselves, the best in the world at Amazon profitability, but you're bringing up some really interesting points. If you're a brand owner, you've got to think differently about each channel. One day we're going to build technology that's going to bridge those gaps and do those calculations. That's exactly what you're doing now, which is awesome. I mean, you have to think like that as a brand, to think differently in each channel.
Yeah, they all operate very differently. So you need to have a good understanding of all the cost bases in each channel. So to go back to one of your very first points, you need to kind of go line by line within Amazon to understand, especially if you're using something like FBA where you have a commission on the sale, pick and pack, inbound shipping, and then let's not forget the cost of all the labor associated with running that channel as well. So yeah, there's a lot to think about here, and what you've put together with Takeometrics and Insight and Sponsored Product Optimizer is just a way for merchants and brands to make all that a little bit simpler and more transparent for their company. So thank you for joining us today, Alistair. It's been
thank you.
Very insightful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kerry. I mean, I really appreciate it. It's a pleasure. I'm really impressed by what you guys do, and I hope it's been useful. I mean, in a way, no one really knows what's going on with e-commerce because it's changing so often, and that's the sort of beauty of our industry. And I think you guys over there are just doing an amazing job of evolving. I'm really glad I can help and share some of my insights too.
Great. And so where should people go if they want to find out more about your software?
Well, you can just visit our website, takeometrics.com, and get a free demo, reach out to us. We've got a great team here in Boston. We've got people who are so passionate about helping sellers with profitability. I know that's the topic of our chat today. So reach out to us. We can have a chat, look at your business. We can even sync and authenticate your account with sponsored products, tell you how much wasted ad spend there is. Those things, we'd love to do because ultimately we're helping. The sales part just comes naturally because the software is so good. And we'd love to reach out and help as many sellers as possible. So feel free to get in touch via our website.
Great. Thanks, Alistair. Talk to you soon.
Thank you so much. Take care, Kerry. Bye.
Bye.
All right. Well, thanks for that interview with Alistair, Kiri. That was a very interesting take on protecting your margins and on Amazon and kind of ways to pay attention to profitability issues. I love any conversation where one of the points that's really emphasized is an eye on your inventory levels. So I feel like the conversation you had, it's totally talking my language. And I feel like it could tie nicely to our inventory only focused podcast that has to be happening sometime soon.
That's a great point. Yeah, I think the focus on inventory is important. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, it's a really great point that seems like a pretty quick win for many brands on Amazon. Just check what sizes and dimensions Amazon has for each of your SKUs. And we've seen this at Bobsled when we're looking across the catalog of products where we can have otherwise identical products and they will just have been weighed or measured differently by Amazon employees or robots or whoever is doing that at the fulfillment centers. And it's a quick fix. All you need to do is ask them to revisit those measurements, and you could be saving a lot of money on fulfillment fees that way.
Oh, yeah. I think there was one time that we found for one of my clients that a pair of socks was being classified as oversized. Like, no.
Whoa.
Yeah. So it is really, really. But that is such an important part to include in your process of account maintenance, is just confirm that the fees that are being charged are reflective of the actual dimensions that your products are. So that's a really important piece.
Yeah, definitely.
And one of the other pieces just around inventory, that a recent news update from Amazon is how they are going to be updating inventory storage fees.
Yes.
So it's a whole other level of impact on profitability. And I think it's in September that they'll be changing their long-term storage fee, charging that fee from us every 6 months basis to a monthly basis. Is that correct?
Yes. Exactly. Yep.
Holy.
So the inventory long-term storage fees are increasing. I think by our calculation by around 20%, and then they're going to be assessed on a monthly basis as well.
Wow. So that's one way for Amazon to be dealing with fulfillment center crowding.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's very interesting because they're opening fulfillment centers at a rapid rate. It's obviously they are not just a retail company. They are a logistics company and making big moves in the logistics and fulfillment space. And so they're opening new fulfillment centers aggressively throughout the US and other territories as well. But even then, they can't really keep up with the vast quantities of inventory that get shipped in. And Amazon does not want to be a warehouse. That's why they're called fulfillment centers very deliberately and not warehouses, because they don't want all this inventory in their FCs sitting out there for months or years at a time and not being shipped out. It's extremely inefficient with all of the technology that they have installed in those warehouses to have inventory sitting around for a long time. So they want to penalize for that kind of activity where, a merchant is sending an inventory that they want to last for 6 months, and Amazon is more wanting it to last for 1 month.
Yeah.
So then the imperative is even greater that merchants have a very, very good understanding of their inventory at Amazon, their lead time, like how long it will take them to get new inventory in to replace it, best and worst case scenarios, and be tracking that very closely so that they don't get penalized with these storage fees.
Well, and further to the point that you guys discussed during your conversation today, the approach of an expanded catalog versus a focused, effective catalog, really being strategic and zeroing in on what works in your catalog and not just trying to kind of put a number of products up in your catalog just for diversity's sake. I think that the change in the storage fees might kind of force that focus anyway.
Yeah, definitely. So I do want to point out one thing about this interview with Alistair, and that is that we did focus on profitability. And that is not always the number one objective for brands being on Amazon. Sometimes it's about reach, exposure, getting your brand into the hands of a new type of customer that you couldn't access through other channels. There's a variety of reasons why brands are on Amazon and choose the strategies that they do. And I guess I would just want to make that clear to everyone listening that, yes, if you're optimizing for profitability, that you want to have a focused assortment, you want to be really optimizing each of those products in your assortment, and being very careful about how you expand it. If you're a merchant that has hundreds of thousands of SKUs already and you need to be working through that assortment and getting them up on Amazon because your main priority is reach and exposure and getting your products available to people shopping on Amazon, then you're going to need to take those steps before you go back and start revising profitability, because there needs to be a certain period of time where you can work through those listings, optimize them, see if they stick, and then go back and optimize for the assortment that's performing well. So it's not the strategy that everyone is going to be interested in. But if profitability is a main priority for your brand, then definitely some good tips in here.
That's a really good point. And I think it goes back to at the get-go, being clear on what your goals are. And it could be your account level goals, but there could also be sectors of your catalog that you have profitability goals while others have different goals in terms of building out a breadth of an assortment or getting some reach in terms of your brand, whatever it might be. So I do think being clear on what your goals are is critical.
Yes.
And then just knowing the good steps, the good things to zero in on if profitability is a goal, if it is a focus of yours, because I think you can kind of go with thinking about keeping an eye on profitability. You might just think about, money spent on advertising, but there's a lot more to look at there than just something as obvious as advertising fees or even the basic FBA referral fees or whatever it might be. The cost of unsold inventory and the inventory storage fees and the shipping dimensions and all of that. Those are all factors that might go missed.
Yep.
If not for the conversation you and Alistair had today.
Yeah. And then right at the end, I kind of snuck in this kind of red herring around reorder reports and CLTV. Or not a red herring, but I had it on my list of things to talk about and only just remembered at the very end of our interview. So I think it is, to go back to your point around what are your goals, for many brands, they are playing a very they're dancing a delicate dance with Amazon and their other sales channels, and they're trying to balance the generally better margins that they get from selling through their own e-commerce store, the relationship that they have with their retail partners in brick and mortar, and then wanting to be available and accessible to people who prefer to shop on Amazon. And so a lot of those interests conflict with each other, and it becomes really complicated to track how valuable is my Amazon channel compared to brick and mortar? How valuable is it compared to e-commerce? And the best way to look at that is on a channel basis, not just sales or even profitability. You want to be looking at how valuable are your Amazon customers in aggregate over time versus your e-commerce customers, which you can get a similar level of data on, more data actually. And so that's why we find these reports very, very helpful for brands that have an interest in tracking profitability across their channels. And like I said to Alistair, it's a service that we offer to our clients at Bobsled Marketing, and very, very, very valuable for them to understand how much money they should be investing in acquiring a new customer on Amazon through things like PPC or promotions.
Yeah, I was actually glad that you fed that in, because it did lead to another interesting analysis of how to take a look at your Amazon presence. And I think the reorder reports and the customer lifetime value reports really provide a wealth of information about the value of Amazon to your overall business.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, this is a really great episode, and Alistair mentioned where everyone can find more information about Takeometrics and the software options that they provide, and we'll link up to those in the show notes, which are available at ecommercebraintrust.com. And if you have a moment, I would really appreciate if you left a rating and review for this podcast in iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you listen to this podcast. And the other thing that helps us show up in the ratings is if you subscribe to the podcast too. So if you subscribe, that means that you get every episode delivered to you as soon as it goes live, and it helps us show up to more listeners and helps us to keep producing this show. So go ahead and subscribe, leave a rating and a review, and we'll keep making the E-commerce Brain Trust podcast and keep getting guests on the show like Alistair, who can provide a lot of value. Thanks for coming on the show again, Julie, and giving us your thoughts on this interview, and I'll catch you next week.
Sounds great. Thanks, Carrie.